All right, let's start this video with some honesty. If you are a pastor, have you ever had this feeling? When you come down after preaching, you've been up there for however long and in the pulpit, and you come down from the stage and you look at your wife and she just gives you like a nod, like, it was okay. You've done better. I've seen better. Like that kind of a look. Or maybe you've been in the pulpit and you look out and you see that people have fallen asleep. I've been there. I think we've all been there. If you've preached consistently, you've been there. And today I want to help you out by giving you a couple resources that might help you just improve a little bit. As preachers, we are constantly wanting to get better at our craft. Preaching is a craft. We all need to learn and to grow. And if you're not a pastor, this still applies to you, because we are all preachers. You might not have a pulpit that you go into every Sunday, but you do have a mission from God to go and preach the gospel to everyone. So we all need to be able to preach the gospel. So how do we do that? Well, one book that's been very helpful to me is On Preaching by H.B. Charles Jr. Now, when he wrote this book, not a whole lot of people knew about him, but now they do, because he's preached at a lot of big events. But he is a consistently excellent preacher, someone to learn from. And basically what this book is him walking you through every step of what it takes to prepare a good sermon, and then some tips at the end about how to do that a little bit better over time. So if you are someone who preaches regularly and you just want a little bit of encouragement, maybe a little bit of advice, this book would be good for you. But if you're someone who only does like maybe a Bible study or a Sunday school, or maybe you're just thinking about your own devotions, maybe you have more of an expository style of devotions, this would be an excellent book to get. It's a very small book. You'll be able to read it in just a couple days. It's really good. Number 4 would be one that I would say is a little bit more theological, not as practical as H.B. Charles Jr.'s books, but one that is, I think, a little bit better in that he gets behind the reasoning why we are to preach, and a little bit of what a preacher should be considering before they even preach that sermon. And that is The Supremacy of God in Preaching by John Piper. Now, you probably know who John Piper is, but this is actually one of his older books, and it's not really talked about all that much, and it should be, because basically what he's arguing for is that preaching is a form of worship. That someone who is going to preach that gospel, preach a text to someone else, is actually going to be worshiping God through the delivery of that truth. And so how do you prepare for that? John Piper writes about that. And then at the end, he kind of looks at Jonathan Edwards, who I think is probably his hero, and looks at some of his preaching and kind of pulls out mines for us, some great advice to be able to take into the pulpit. So I would say The Supremacy of God in Preaching is one that you must read, especially if you're a John Piper fan. You should read that book. Number 3 is one that I didn't actually read for a long time. I had always heard the name. I was even present when the documentary came out, like its premiere, and I didn't go because I was like, I don't want to go watch a movie. I want to go like look at books or something. It was dumb. But then a couple years ago, I kind of fell in love with this preacher, and that is Preaching and Preachers by Martin Lloyd-Jones. I lost the cover a long time ago. This is the 40th anniversary edition. This is such an excellent book. What this is a collection of essays from Martin Lloyd-Jones talking to students and saying this is what it means to preach the gospel. In here, you will find why he says that preaching is logic on fire. All of those great quotes that people talk about with Martin Lloyd-Jones and preaching, you're going to find a lot of them in this book. I would say this is a foundation, of what it means to do expository preaching. This would be like the starting point. So if you are thinking about like Maybe a couple of these books would be more foundational for like Bible studies and personal devotions. This would be like the step up to be like, okay, let's go a little bit deeper than that. That's what this book can do for you. If you haven't read this, man, you're missing out. There's so much rich truth in it. Now, number 4 is one I read it right when it came out, right away. I read this book, and I'm so glad that I did, because I was going through one of those periods where I was just feeling like my preaching was a little bit stale. No one was coming up to me and saying, Pastor Dean, your sermons lately, whew, they've taken a nosedive. No one was saying that, but I kind of felt that. And so I was trying to improve, and then I read this book, and I think it helped me out quite a bit, and that is Preaching That Moves People by Yancey Arrington. And basically what he's doing in this book is, that Matt Chandler phrase that he says all the time, are you tracking with me? Or maybe it's probably a lot of megachurch pastors who use that phrase quite a bit. That's basically what this book is doing. It's asking, are you tracking with me? And trying to help the pastor figure out how they can make sure that the congregation is tracking with them. So it's not just, I wouldn't say this is like the most like deep theological work. Okay, this is a very practical book about how to make sure that you have one main point, the main point of the text that you want to communicate. How do you apply that? How do you go from the top of the mountain of figuring out what the text means to the bottom of the mountain and being able to apply it to people's lives and have them take it home and actually do it? Not just say an application, but for them to follow through on that. That's what this book is all about. It's excellent. Now, the last book that I'll say is one that I read in seminary, one that was very helpful for me, and I would say does basically everything that I've said so far, and does it in a very practical way, and that is The Art of Preaching in the 20th Century Between Two Worlds by John Stott. Now, John Stott and Martin Lloyd-Jones, it's kind of funny to put them on the same list because they famously did not get along toward the end of their ministries. But this book is excellent. It's basically everything that I've already said of how do you do expository preaching, but also the applicable side of how do you communicate that in a way that is helpful for people. And there's one thing that I really like, because John Stott does a little bit more. Lloyd-Jones does it too, but John Stott really focuses on the person, the preacher, and this is what he has to say about him. From all this, that is again evident that preaching can never be degraded into the learning of a few rhetorical techniques. A whole theology lies beneath it, and a whole lifestyle behind it. The practice of preaching cannot be divorced from the person of the preacher. And I love that, because I believe that is 100% true, that you cannot separate the two things, a preacher and the preaching. If the preaching sounds good, but it's coming from someone who is a total hypocrite, that's not good preaching. You need to live it out and then be able to communicate that with others. So those would be my top 5 books on preaching. Let me know if you've read any of these or if you're interested in reading any of these, and let me know if there's something missing from the list. What would you put as your favorite book on preaching? I'll see you in the next video.